Hello and welcome to American Amnesia. I'm your host, Cliff Garner, and this is being broadcast on YouTube at Clisario 2, and will be posted on my Cliff Garner page and Facebook, and also the American Amnesia page I have on Facebook as well. I still haven't figured out mine. Haven't had time. And it looks like Gab right now is being censored because of an association with the anti-Semite guy. That I would refer you to Sticks Hexenhammer 666's posts actually on this issue. I'm pretty much in agreement with him on this. The what's going on there is just total garbage, really. There's no reason that Gab shouldn't come through this pretty well in the long run, as long as they hold together. It looks like they're looking at maintaining their platform elsewhere. This is the issue: is that you're looking at the Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, all those. They're wanting to have it both ways. The choice is to be either a platform for people to publish on and to do their own thing and basically give them the freedom to do it, or they are a publisher who is responsible for the material that they publish, and that in order to meet their obligations and the possible liabilities from lawsuits and such that would come with that they would therefore have the right, and unquestionable right, to not accept certain material. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to blur the distinction between the two. Gab meanwhile, has asserted that it is a platform. It is not responsible for the material that's on it, although there are certain things that they are not only entitled to, but probably even obligated to censor if it's of an illegal nature or something. But you've got Twitter that doesn't even censor the kiddie porn. And they get away with it. But they censor people for not having the right opinion. Now, this is total nonsense. And the sooner it stops, the better. Yeah, it's inexcusable. And what Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and Google have been doing is disgusting, actually. One of the things a lot of people didn't catch is that during that market adjustment that we just went through, a lot of that market adjustment was the money and everything else, censorship included, that's caught up to those platforms, or whatever you want to call them, Twitter, Google, Facebook, and YouTube. So when as those have been caught up, catching up with, or actually being caught up to by their consequences, it has taken a huge toll on their money. Oh, and Amazon too. They got hit really hard. Some of the other companies, internet companies mostly. It really wasn't the large manufacturers or anything of that sort that really got hit. It was mostly tech companies, and these new tech companies that have been actually regressive of late, and they have it coming, like I say. So that's one thing I did want to kind of kick out there. The election is coming up. I actually see a red swelling coming up. There's already been a washing over, but there's a swelling that's coming up from the masses, and it's not done. I don't think it's even close to done. The Democrats have unleashed forces they have no way of controlling, and they're going to reap the whirlwind here. They've invoked probably the most violent elements in American politics, and they have pushed others into a corner, which is going to spring on them too. But the main thing is that they have pushed against the people themselves. They want to punish us. And this is part of the mentality that has come with being used to having power, and particularly power that most people don't call into account. See, that's the difference between Trump and the others. The others were playing along to go along. They were accepting the false spectrum of left to right through the neocon, neo-lib lens, which distorted where the center was. It created not only a false center, but a false spectrum that actually was considerably further to the left than you would tend to think of it as. It actually came out of the 60s movements. Here, I need to take this. Okay, I had to take that call. So at any rate, I was talking about what was I talking about? I was kind of done with it. Moving on to other things. There's been a lot of stuff going on, and the election's coming up. Like I say, I think it's a groundswell that I don't necessarily think it's a wave, but I think what you're going to see is that a lot of what's going on with the early voting is going to turn very sharply for the Republicans. In fact, I think with the black vote, a lot of those people are listed as Democrats. And if Trump has anything close to that 40%, you can just write everything off. I mean, it's done. I'm gonna guess maybe closer to 30 overall with the vote, though. And I think that's going to be interesting. Today, Kanye West had a falling out apparently with Candace Owens, and he's saying that she kind of hoodwinked him or something of that sort. I don't know quite what to make of all that. Although I do know that Kanye is Kanye, and he's a very creative guy, and it's good to see that he's thinking for himself, and I think that's part of what this is. I think he's reasserting himself against her because she's got a political agenda, and he probably is a little bit frightened at how powerful that this whole Brexit idea is, and he didn't want to completely abandon the Democrats. I don't think. I think what he was seeing was kind of a middle position. I think that what blacks need to do, though, is to assert their independence and let the Democrats know it's like, hey, look, you can't take us for granted anymore. They have done that for so long, and not only that, been just really wicked about it. It's been really pretty sickening what they do to those that get outside of the fold. And they try to do that with Hispanics as well, and Hispanics well, Hispanics are very obviously not a monolithic group of people. They come from many different locations. They speak very different dialects of Spanish. They even lump Brazilians into this category. And it's a wonder they don't with Haitians, but they don't for some reason. But they do with the Brazilians. The Brazilians don't speak Spanish. They speak Portuguese. And then you get down to Belize, and there's some that speak Spanish, but a lot of those folks don't speak Spanish. They speak English. Hello. So you have this really arbitrary attempt to force people into a mold and put them in these little boxes and these little groups that are easier to control. And this has been the Democrat Party's method for a long time of actually controlling at least a certain segment of the population all the time. It's a kind of divide and conquer type of a tactic. And it uses all these wedge identity issues that gays don't necessarily have the same needs and wants as straight people. And that's probably true. In fact, I know it's true up to a point, but there are points in which that doesn't matter what your sexuality is, that your concerns are often the same. See, that's the problem. Why don't we focus instead on the things that unify us and make sure that the minorities are protected? That was the idea behind making the country a republic. That's the idea behind making this a constitutional republic, no less, with a democratic feature of voting, for majority. And the whole concept of democracy as mob rule was something that our founding fathers looked down on. And when I was younger, I had a lot of problem with that because I, like most people who tend towards leftist ideas, I believe that participatory democracy and really direct democracy, in which people express their approval or disapproval, with everything. I found that was the way to go, and I used to see it that way. And over the years, I have grown away from that. As a matter of fact, I'm so far away from that idea that I'm rather contemptuous of it. But when I was younger, I understand that appeal. I was there. And I think a lot of us go through that. Me, I was a little more extreme than most, but hey, I was also trying to come up with some original ideas on how to maintain a society. I was putting my utopian views into practice as much as I could. That's probably part of why I'm, at least when I was still not married and have no kids. Who knows, that could change, but right now that's where I'm at. And you get older and you're wondering if maybe there should be more to it than this. So at any rate, that's some of what I see going on, and I think that to some extent that what Kanye is trying to do is trying to regain control over what he sees as a movement that he's made. He has contributed quite a bit towards that, but I don't think that he can claim all the credit either. I think Candace Owens probably every bit as much of an influence as he is, although he's a big name entertainer, celebrity that really helped get it off the ground. But And not only that, I think that what Kanye is also doing is also setting himself up in a position to where he can talk to both sides. And I think that's probably a good place for him to be. I don't see him as being, in the long run, a politician. I know that there was talk of him running for president at one time. Actually, before Trump was nominated, there was talk of Kanye eventually running for president, and I won't sell him short as a person of a certain type of genius, actually. But at the same time, I don't see him as being stable in his ideas enough to where he would do that. Who knows? Maybe a few years down the road, he might actually come up with something rather interesting. I wouldn't be surprised. I'm looking forward to seeing in the next few years, particularly out of black conservatives, but it could be people like Kanye who are kind of taking a new center position. That these are where a lot of good ideas in the future are going to come from. A lot of creative ideas on how to work policy, work public works, and everything else. New ideas, new thoughts, things that have been stifled for a long time and kept down. That whole experience of with the black neighborhoods and stuff. This is where a lot of the need is. And because a lot of the need is there are people who have been living through that, whose experience is going to make them a bit more expert in how to probably fix it. And I think for the foreseeable future, I think we're going to see a lot more black people rising up on the right and in the center, who are going to have new ideas that are going to be put into action. And I think that that's good. It's about time. They've been strangulated by a party that's really working very hard to find some kind of a justification for even existing at this point. And I have the feeling that they might not for much longer. They need to reform. And what the problem is that they have come up against the same forces that the Republicans had come up against in the previous election in 2012, when they put Romney forward, and they did it by screwing over Ron Paul. Ron Paul was actually the people's choice, and the people then were ready for something more transformative, I think would be a good word for it. That there was the desire for change, and that has been there all along. That's what got Obama elected, was that people were tired of the neocon violence, and the welfare state's one thing. I don't really have a problem with it. But when it comes down to the warfare end of that I really have a problem with it. And the idea of shipping jobs abroad and shipping business abroad and everything else, that was actually meant to that was meant by certain corporate elites around the world to actually pull the world into a unified political entity. And this type of globalism, I think, has now been exposed for the garbage that it has turned out to be. And I actually at one point was going along with it. I suppose with Bush is where I agreed with it probably most. I had some issues with with Clinton. But on the whole, I didn't really mind certain aspects of what he did. And Papa Bush, too. I mean, these neocon, neo-lib ideas that formed their own center. Like I say, it was a false center, but it was still a type of a center anyway, that created a new spectrum, right? And you really couldn't account for a lot of ideas. Where did they come from? Well, paleocons had nothing to do with this. So it and traditional leftists, for that matter, too. I mean, they were definitely out of place. I mean, everybody was kind of out of place and disjointed, and what the real center was actually quite a bit over to the right a little bit, if you want to put it that way. But that's kind of secondary. It's just that this false this false center was where they were operating at, and that's where the press is now. The mainstream corporate whore press is there now. They have been there for a long time, and since Obama, they've become completely unhinged. See, and Obama was the pivot, I think. They think that they figured, since he was a socialist, I don't really think he was a socialist. He had social programs, but I don't really think of him as a socialist. I think that if he were a socialist, he'd actually had some kind of a value, like Bernie. I would have respected that a whole lot more. Instead, what you had him being backed by the bankers and the big corporations. But the big bankers were the main ones with him. But they kind of saw him as being the pivot. That what he did was as a continuity, or continuation, of Bush II and his foreign policy. He actually extended Bush's foreign policy even further, to a greater extent and a greater extreme, if you really want to look at it. I mean, the war in Yemen, war in Syria, war in Libya, war in Uganda, war in the Congo. I mean, he was taking war to a whole new level. And he was getting away with that. Mali? I mean, good grief, people. And people are like, well, what are we doing in those countries? It's like, well, Obama put us there, dumbass. He put us there. I watched it from overseas. It was easier to see from there than it is over here because they don't tell people anything here. They've had a blackout on international news all along. They've been doing that since Clinton. So, I understand the ignorance, but at the same time, I get really fed up with the fact that even when I tell people and show people, they don't acknowledge it. It's like I'm speaking Swahili or something to them. Obama was a warmonger. He wasn't a peace president. He was a warmonger. He was one of the worst. He was worse than Bush, too. And, I hear people saying, well, Bush was the worst. And it's like, I don't know about that. That him and Obama, they're a race to the basement between the two. And Obama's the bigger disappointment, that's for sure. Bush too. I mean, that he could tie his own shoes actually proved the critics wrong. But with Obama, I mean, there was so much promise there and so much so-called change that there was supposed to come from it. That there was no change. None. I understand the pride that black people felt for Obama because he was one of them, or he looked like one of them. But number one, he was half white. Number two, he wasn't African American. He was African. He was very proud of that point. So even if his father wasn't Barack Obama Sr., and Lord knows who it would have been, he wasn't raised that way, and he surely didn't see himself as being the average black person here in America. He surely didn't. And his experience, because of that, was completely different. And then you get into the Billy Ayers and the probable CIA links and stuff. I mean, it just really gets really freaky. But you have to take that seriously. He probably was connected to the CIA, and that's probably where he got his start. His mother was in some pretty interesting places, at some really interesting times. And so when you look at him, it's like, if you explain it as him being CIA, that explains everything. So, at any rate, I'm going to close it up kind of quickly. I don't have a whole lot. Well, there is one more thing. This recent thing with the Khashoggi, or Khashoggi, actually, Khashoggi, how it should be pronounced. There's a few things that the news was not telling you about him. First of all, his uncle Adnan was a huge Saudi arms dealer, and he was caught up in the middle of the Iran-Contra affair. He was the arms dealer that was selling the arms basically to the Contras in Central America. His cousin was Dodi Fayed, the man who was having an affair with Princess Diana and died with her in that car accident. We are looking at a fabulously wealthy family. And with Jamal himself, there's a few things that we need to I need to explain real quickly. First of all, the family, his father was half Turkish. And so you can see that there's this, geographical, ethnic, and kind of angle to it all. But the father had become the physician for the king of Saudi Arabia, the older king, like couple back, 2 or 3 previous ones. At any rate, he was the physician, and this is where they made their money. And their whole family is just, between the Saudi half and the Turkish half. And I'm not even sure what Adnan Khashoggi is all about. I really don't know the angle there, but I do know that he was one of the richest men in the world. In fact, at one time, he was the richest man in the world. And he died only a couple of years ago. And so this money was partly in the hands of Jamal. He got a certain amount of it anyway. So we're looking at a guy that's got tons, and I do mean tons of money. And in his particular story is that he was friends with Osama bin Laden at a pretty early point, but he stayed friends with him throughout, and that he also had contacts in and espoused the position of the Muslim Brotherhood. This angle, the Muslim Brotherhood with Osama, should probably explain part of the dubious relationship that he had with the current ruling family of Saudi Arabia. It should give you some indications there. He was probably involved under the previous king, and maybe even one before that, in intelligence. This is really likely. And one of the things about this, and it just really smells bad, is what is Turkey's interest in a Saudi journalist slash rich guy who was kind of on the outs with the current ruling family. See, his pal was the cousin, I think, of the current king, who was busted after the initial shakeup, that comes with trying to consolidate power. And this particular one, I can't think of his name now. That he, hang on a second. He was the one who was tied up with the Four Seasons Hotel in Las Vegas, and that hotel is the dual hotel from which the shooting occurred a year ago. So, hang on a second. Saudi royal family. Four Seasons Hotel Vegas. Let me see if I can get something out of that. Yeah, here it is. His name's Prince Al-Waleed. Hang on a second. Al-Waleed bin Talal. Now, this guy owns part of Twitter, and he owns all kinds of other stuff. I think he's invested in Google real heavily and some other things. But he had the Four Seasons Hotel that was connected to the Mandalay Bay. See, that's a dual hotel. There's two hotels in one. And this was one of these things that everybody looked at and they're like, "No, that's interesting," and they didn't pursue it any further. But what happened to Talal was that he was apparently a pretty well-known pedophile. And after seizing power and working things out with Trump, he consolidated his power, and he went after Talal as being recalcitrant towards the new order of things. And they probably tortured the man, and they divested him of some of his wealth. But they also they got other things. There was a whole ton of pedophiles and human traffickers that went down in this. So this is all part of that. And Khashoggi was friends of his. And one of the things he was doing is that he was from here in the U.S. and in Turkey. He was writing articles that were critical of the current Saudi ruling family. Now, is he a journalist? Well, yeah, I suppose so. He's a writer. I mean, okay. But I think that he was more of an operative, and he was probably not just a double agent. He's probably turned 2 3 times. He's probably triple or quadruple agent. And I'm willing to bet, that the Turkish MIT was one of the ones that turned him. and he was probably providing them with a lot of information on the Saudi government. And I'd be willing to bet on that. And so when the Saudis got him into the consulate there, they probably tortured him, according to what they're saying now. It's a fight, but I kind of doubt that. I think they probably took him into the back room and started doing some pretty nasty things, drilling holes in his fingers or something. And he died in the process, and they chopped him up. Really gory work, but we say that we don't worry about the interior affairs of a country, and then we turn around and we need to do something about it. No, we don't. We do need to determine what was going on there, but we the people will probably never find out. It was probably something to do with international intrigue, and I have the feeling that this story will probably die soon. But just keep your eye on it as much as you can, because I have the feeling that that's what it was. And in Erdogan's interest in this, I think was actually that he had turned this guy, and he might even had some cash involved. So one of the things that Khashoggi was trying to do was he's trying to marry a Turkish woman, and he's a dual citizen anyway. I mean, he's Turkish and Saudi, and so that wasn't really that big of a deal. Now, while I was living in Turkey, I did go past the Saudi compound a few times. It's in Besiktas, a really nice area, and it's kind of a fortress. In fact, it is a fortress. And so when the Turkish police went in there, that was kind of some heavy repercussions going on there. I think part of what's going on is it has something to do with, to be really blunt, I think it has something to do with Yemen. Turkey has been wanting to intervene there for a while, and Saudi Arabia has kept them out. And I think that may have been kind of the kicker. But I can't verify that. One of the things I did do, though, is while I was there, I went past it a few times. It was kind of interesting to see it. It's like, oh, okay, that's really tucked away, because you really don't see it from the road. I mean, you have to kind of know where it is, and oh, all right, I see. And ours is out a little further out. It's past Maslak area there, and it's a little bit more remote. I like ours better. We have and it's a fortress too. In fact, it's in two places. It has a compound on the outside where they process you, and then they're able to shut it down and isolate it if it ever got attacked. And they would have to come uphill to assail the actual consulate up there. It's a fort. It's a big fort. It's built that way. You can see it from the road. It's like, holy cow. And you're not messing with it. So that front part has been attacked twice, to my knowledge, and there were a couple guards that were killed when I first got there in 2008, and everybody was worried about me because of it. But it wasn't even close to where I lived. But I did do some work out that way. And also I traveled up that way. It was in Besiktas. I had some privates there. I was teaching one of the top comedians in Turkey, and she lived up the hill from there, and it was down there in that area. And another place that's real close to that was there was an assault by some religious fanatics connected to ISIS, actually, that shot up a nightclub a few years ago, and that was in the same area. So, A really nice area. I also taught a lot of the guys that worked on the compound. I taught the consulate's children, and I taught several of his top people. I do not know, and I wouldn't know anyway, if any of those people were actually involved in this, because I haven't seen them since then, and I've forgotten their names, to be really blunt. But it really kind of freaks me out, because it's possible that I knew people that were involved in this. So at any rate, until next time, we'll see you.